Arguments with your spouse, relationships, friends. You just can't get over it. What are you going to do? Let's answer that next on Finally Alive Radio.
Welcome to the weekly teaching program from Finally Alive Ministries with pastor and counselor Gary Aris. Gary is a full-time pastoral counselor and teacher of God's Word. He has a remarkably deep passion to see people set free in Christ. You may call our prayer line at 657-246-2464 or email at prayer@finallyalive.com. That's prayer@finallyalive.com. Now, let's join Gary as he shares some amazing truth from God's counsel in this week's teaching.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Finally Alive Radio. I'm your host, Gary Aris. Thank you for your prayers. I've gotten some responses, emails about my backache, so thank you guys for those who prayed. I actually feel a lot better. I think I'm about 85% mobility now, so thank you for that. Yeah, that backache lasted a while there, almost a week. So I'm pretty good with backaches. I don't get them that often, but if you do, hey, you're in my prayers too. I'll be praying for you too, of course. By the way, I'm your host, Gary Aris, your very own Christian counselor. And if you didn't know by now, I do couples counseling too. So I wanted to talk about that and share with you some different things that I see and I've dealt with here. Maybe some stuff in my own marriage, things that I've been able to help with. What I've seen is most cases in couples counseling are solvable. And my stance with any problem in life is no matter what the problem is, there's always an answer. The issue is going to be whether you and I are willing to accept the answer. And that's what this all comes down to, is are we willing to accept the answer? And that's what we'll see even in couples counseling is we can find the answer, but are you willing to accept the answer? And let's be honest, that's easier said than done. So be it. So the typical couple comes in, of course, distressed, probably talking about divorce, and the argument goes back and forth, well, I do this, and they don't XYZ, and when I say this, but yeah, you did this, well, I did that because you said that. Well, I said that because you did this, and well, if you weren't such a fill in the blank, then I wouldn't have to do fill in the blank. And the merry-go-round goes round and round. And some of it can go really, really bad. I mean, there are times when the couple can really take a good jab at one another. That is pretty painful. So it's things to be aware of. And we have to admit, I mean, it wears you out. It really does. After arguing and arguing and arguing, you're so worn out that you just don't care anymore. You can come to that point, and that makes total sense. It's painful. It's hard. And sure, a lot of the self-help books will say, be nice to one another, respond nicely. That's all good stuff. That's all good stuff. Personally, I think that's a little bit more on the shallower end. Still good stuff. I would still definitely use it, but more on the shallow end. But I will tell you what I see behind closed doors over here. So number one, the best scenarios that I've seen, and I've said this before, are scenarios where the couple are practicing Catholics, practicing Christians. And not just Christian by name. That's why I said practicing Christian. Not just believing in God, not just believing in Jesus, also being in church. Something about being in church, having the fellowship, having people around you, being amongst other people who think similar to you and have similar beliefs. Something about that. And also, obviously, the most important thing, the Spirit of God, that you're doing your best to follow His path, obviously can only help. So I would tell people that's the primary thing. Do your best to be a good follower, a good disciple of Christ, which means you have to be a good disciple of your pastor. You have to be able to follow your pastor. And yes, sometimes through his own folly, he's going to have his moments, he's going to have his days. There's going to be things that you're going to disagree with. That's normal. That's totally normal. There isn't a single person that agrees with another person 100%. But if you can come to an agreement with most things while they preach, then you're good. You're okay. So that would be the number one thing. The second thing that's going to help is going to be you and your issues. Notice it's no longer about the couple. It's about you. Typically, the issue isn't And this usually shakes people up when I tell them this in a session. I tell them it's not the couple, it's not the relationship per se that has the issue. It's you who has an issue in life, whatever is going on in your life. It's you who has an issue which spills over into the relationship with your spouse, with your loved one. Just about every time, it's that. So even though people come in for couples counseling, really, we're doing a lot of individual counseling, which spills over into couples counseling. So that said, let's talk about you a little bit, because I can see how this can sound very confusing. Because of course, what you're probably thinking is, well, my spouse is the one who doesn't get it. My spouse is the one who can't comprehend what I'm trying to tell them. They're the one with the problem. That is issue number one right there, is that it's easier to blame the other person. It's the easiest thing. I can point fingers all day long. But the real issue is going to be, can you find, or are you willing to find your own faults? We all have faults. Everybody does. If you think you don't have any faults, you're really going to need to go to the Lord about that. Nobody is 100% innocent ever. But see, this is why being a Christian is going to be so important, because almost rule number one after salvation, after believing in Jesus, is you need to be humble. Humbleness means you need to be willing to admit your faults. Humbleness means you need to be willing to say, yeah, I have my own problems, I have my own issues. I'm willing to admit that. That's a part of what humbleness is. Can you do that? It's very difficult to do. I don't think everyone can do it. In Matthew 6:19 and 20, Jesus is talking about laying up treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves can break in and steal. But verse 20 says, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys. Now, what does that have to do with this? We're taking the principle of this and applying it to marriage here, because verse 21 says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So the question is, what is your treasure? What do you love? What do you adore in life? If it's money, then you're gonna worship money. Is it your spouse? It could be. That's good. And let's go through the quick order of that. Let's actually define love first. And there's many ways to define love. Even in counseling, with temperaments. Remember, I'm a temperament counselor, so I will break down different languages of love, if you will. And I'll break it down in two ways, very simple. One is serving, that's the main one, and the other one is going to be showing it with affection, hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous. For example, the hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous temperament is going to be the sanguine temperament. That's the technical name of it. The temperament that appreciates service or will serve for their loved ones is typically the melancholy, the more introvert type of temperaments. But that said, how do we define love now? Now, the hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous is awesome, by the way. Nothing wrong with that. But let's bring Christ into this. How did Jesus show love to people? Really think about this one. What did he do? How much hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous did he do? Not much. A little bit maybe. I'm sure he did. But it's not really talked about. What did he do? He did miracles. He preached. He taught them things. And the greatest thing that Christ did was voluntarily go up on that cross to be crucified. And then, of course, the third day he rose again. That was the ultimate act of love. In John 15:12 and 13, Jesus says, this is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. That is the greatest act of love, to lay down your life for your loved one. And let's simplify that. It really comes down to sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself? Even to this degree that Jesus talks about, to lay down your life. And let's go from the shallow to the deepest. The shallow is laying down your wants. Sometimes what you want is nice, it's great, but not quite expedient. It doesn't do anything, it doesn't profit anything. So can you lay down your wants? Once in a while, you might have to lay down your needs. Here, and I'll give you a good one with the whole, submission of wives submitting to their husbands, according to what the word says. Maybe the wife knows that the husband investing in product X is going to be a really bad idea. Some cases, it's not a giant investment. Once in a while, for the sake of learning, because you'll have to lay down what you know is going to be right. Now, this isn't for every case, every time, all the time, but you may have to lay this down once in a while for the sake of them learning. Look, Jesus did that. Jesus didn't break down every little thing that they were doing wrong. He'd break down the major things, but allow the smaller things for life to teach you. And sometimes, unfortunately, we have to do that, even as parents. Even as parents, there are some things that you have to allow your kids to go through and experience. Of course, nothing wild and dangerous, but my saying is, look, you have to allow your kids to skin their knee a little bit. There's only so many times me as a parent can say, hey, stop doing that, don't do that, you're going to hurt yourself. Sometimes, unfortunately, they have to skin their knee just a little bit to really understand, because life, unfortunately, ends up being a better teacher sometimes than a parent, because the parent has wisdom, the child doesn't. And the child needs to experience what the parent has already learned. Now, on a deeper level, one laying down their life for their loved one, it may go down to, hey, are you willing to give up, a kidney? Many people have. Are you willing to give up your heart if you had to? Would you take a bullet for your loved one? These, they're deeper, but less likely. Can it happen? Of course it can happen, but these are the things that are a lot less likely to happen. But that's how we define love. Sacrifice. Being committed to that loved one of yours. There's no other way. Again, hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous are awesome. Awesome. They're great. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what Jesus did. So we're just taking examples from Christ. If we want to define love, that's a great way to do it. We can look at it from God's perspective. God sending his own son to be a sacrifice for your sins and my sins. That definitely shows commitment to his creation. That's a different side. I don't know if any of us can do something like that. Sacrificing our own son. That's a big step there. But look, let's make this really clear. I'm not against hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous. Now, I'll get nice and personal for you. I'm not the hugging, touching, kissing kind of person. Just the way God made me. That's just. But my gift is service. I like to serve and help that way. Where my wife is, she's the opposite. She loves hugging, touching, kissing. She's the sanguine. So thank God for her. But with a sanguine, I'll tell you how to fix it. It's pretty. it's simple. So she can have a bad day. She's got the kids. She's and they can be a handful, of course. Everyone has their days, right? And she's got a lot of stuff going on, maybe some housework, maybe some other stuff going on. And she's stressed out at the end of the day, and she just can't take any more. And here I come to rescue her with hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous. And it works. It works every time. All I have to tell her is, sweetheart, I love you so much, and give her a hug and a kiss. And just squeeze her and love her. That's kind of her language. Squeeze and love. Not my language. To me, it doesn't make sense to me. How can you fix a problem with hugging, touching, and kissing? But, again, I'm not sanguine. I'm melancholy. And this is a guy thing, I think, too, which we as guys can struggle with. We as guys, we like to fix the problem. Hey, the garage door isn't working. Guess what we do? We go into man mode, into fix mode, and let me fix the garage, right? Or if she was to say, I'm really having a tough day. Here we go into man mode again. Okay, well, what's going on? What's the problem? How do we fix it? Believe it or not, it's funny. Sometimes women just need to be heard. It's the funniest thing. To me, it doesn't make sense, but all I can do is I'll tell you what I've understood with women. Sometimes you just got to listen and do nothing. Isn't that the greatest? You don't have to do a thing. Just listen. So again, I give you personal stories to tell you I don't want to throw away the hugging, touching, kissing, I love yous. That's great. That's part of intimacy. So by all means, don't throw it away. But I think the more important part is going to be the commitment, just like it says here in verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. Can you be that committed? It's that important. Which means if I'm going to be committed to you, that means you're going to be committed to me. So as I'm sacrificing my wants and my needs, you're going to sacrifice your wants and your needs sometimes too. It's the way this works. Easier said than done, but that's the way this works. Are you willing to do that? Now, let me throw a curveball here. What if you feel like you're doing all the sacrificing and they're not? What do you do in that case? Typical counselor answer for you, it depends. It depends on what they're not willing to sacrifice. Is it petty things? If you're going through some tough financial times, your wife getting her nails done may not be the wisest idea. But in some cases, they can still get their nails done. I'll give you an example. Maybe she says, I have to get my nails done. I cannot sacrifice that. It's that important to me. But maybe I won't go and get my hair done. Something simple. So it's a trade-off. So, okay, you won't get your hair done, or I'll get my nails done instead of every week. I don't even know how that works. Ladies, you're the experts here, but let's say this woman gets her nails done every week. Maybe she says, I'll do it every 2 weeks or once a month. I don't even know if that's a good answer, but what if she's willing to do that? Maybe she won't sacrifice it 100%, but find a middle ground. That's important in relationships. Can you find a middle ground? It's not going to be all the way I want it, but it's also not going to be all the way that you want it. So these are important things to consider. So with the commitment also comes understanding. Are you willing to be understanding even the things you can't understand? I know that sounds weird. I'll give you an example. These are common examples, common things that people go through. One spouse grew up in a very neat house. The other spouse grew up with a messy house. Bring those two together, guess what happens? Now we have a clash. One spouse wants everything clean, spick and span. The other one couldn't care less. And now the one who's the neater one now is now going to have issues with the one who isn't so neat. And they can't quite understand. The neat one is saying, how can you not understand? Why would you want your house to be dirty? The other one's saying, who cares? Everything's going to be fine. I can find my clothes. You see, so now we have this disagreement. It's going to happen. It's life. Can they come to a middle ground? Is there some way to resolve that? And there could be many ways to deal with that. It could be, look, okay, the person who's neater does all the cleaning, but the person who's messy maybe does other things. Maybe does the fixing. Maybe does the taking out of the trash or whatever else. Whatever else middle ground works for you. And here's another important thing. Something that works in my house may not work in your house, and that's okay. All right, so things that work perfectly in my house may not work at all in your house. All right, so, and that's fine. And that's the uniqueness of marriage, is that it can work in a lot of different ways. They don't always have to be the same thing in every house. So don't worry about that. All because your friends may be doing it this way and it works for them and it doesn't work for you. Don't let that freak you out. It's fine. You have to find your own unique groove. That's what I call it. Find your own groove and use that. And guess what? It may not work for your neighbor. So it is what it is. Now let's talk about some more personal things. I think this usually tends to be the more important thing. Most couples don't come in because of an issue that they're having today, even though it feels like that. It tends to be more so that there is something that's haunting them or following them from their past and it's now spilling over into the relationship. Some simple examples I can think of from sessions would be trust issues. The couple comes in and one of them say, I don't understand why they don't trust me. I haven't done anything bad. There's no proof that I've done anything bad. Then why wouldn't you trust them? And the other person may just keep giving different reasons, but really just excuses. And once in a while, you'll dig a little bit, and you'll find out, oh, wait a minute. Maybe your dad wasn't trustworthy. Maybe your mom wasn't trustworthy. Maybe they had a bad relationship, hence trust issues. Maybe you had a lot of friends who always stabbed you in the back. Trust issues. You see, these are things that need to be dealt with. It doesn't make you bad if that's what you're going through, or if your spouse or loved one is going through, but it is things to be aware of. And this is where a couples counselor can be really helpful to dig through these things and resolve those things. But many times it's that. I'll give you another example here. A child grows up very spoiled. They were the first boy in the family, and grandma and mom and the whole family were just babying them and doing everything for them, and this child never lifted a finger. Common issue. Now put that person into a relationship where they have to share things. Guess what's going to happen? A lot of issues, right? So these things need to be resolved. So do you see how many things may have stemmed from your youth, from your past, from your childhood, which flows into your relationship now? These are things to be aware of and watch out for, which goes right back to what we were talking about with commitment and sacrifice. And real quick, the order. What is the order of love? Some people define it as, I got to love my family, then God, church. No. It has to be God first. The way you lay this part down is going to define how your life is going to go. Think of it like a building. You need a good, strong foundation. If you have a good, strong foundation, then you can build a good, strong property, a good, strong home on that. What is your foundation? This is the key question here. What will you love more than anything else? It has to be God. It has to, hands down, this is going to be your foundation. And remember, they asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? And he says, love your God with all that you've got, in a nutshell. Everything that makes you, you love God with that. That's the greatest commandment, is to love God. And then the second one is to love one another. So you see how it all comes back to love. But we're defining love as being 100% committed and willing to sacrifice of yourself. Will you do it? Can you do it? The foundation must be God, which means you have to be committed in church. And I'll even say this, you can't just go and leave. No, you have to go. Get involved somehow, some way. It doesn't matter in what. It could be from helping clean the bathrooms to being an usher, being a deacon, helping people, helping the poor, helping in ministry. The key thing, though, in church is going to be preaching the gospel. There's nothing else that's going to be more important than that. But how can you fit in? How can you be a part of? Very important. And I know people say, church isn't for me. I've tried it before. I've done it before. It's not for me. But that's just an excuse. At the end of the day, that's just an excuse. You've got to find a place that's going to be right for you. That's the key to all this. Find the place that is right for you. And I guess I'll give you my personal order here. The personal order is, number one, you got to love God. Number one. The second thing is you love family. Again, this is my personal order, okay? First, God. Second, you love your family. And third will be everything else, from country to work to everything else. Without the first two, the rest of it doesn't even matter. And why I say that is, I'm a big USA fan, so I'm big on country, but the state of the country doesn't matter if the state of the home is ruined. There's a lot of broken homes out there, and maybe you came out of one, and that's heartbreaking. That breaks my heart just even talking about that. But get your house in order. We can sit here and scream and yell, I love my country. Who cares if you love your country if your house is not in order? Get your house in order. And that's God's order. Put it in God's order. And if enough of us do that, watch what will happen to the country. The country will heal. The country will grow. The country will prosper as it has in the past. So there's my simple order of love. Is first, you love God with everything you've got. Second, you love your family. Third, everything else. And that's from everybody else to my country, which is part of everybody else. Work, whatever else, anything else that you're doing. But God must come first. That's just the way it works. Whether that's your ministry, it has to come first. I've heard pastors say, I put my family first and then God. No, it doesn't work. That doesn't make him a bad pastor. But that's a horrible way to do it. You're making the finite people, your family, the foundation, and then you're putting God on top of that? How does that work? It doesn't work. You can't put finite before the infinite. In my mind, it just doesn't make any sense. Back to dealing with personal issues. I think that's an important thing. You really need to go to the Lord about that. Go to your pastor, go to a counselor, and get that figured out. The better you can figure yourself out, the better spouse you can be. Look, I've had anger issues, I've had anxiety issues, I've been depressed in the past. I had to come to a place to figure that out, and I had help. I had colleagues who helped me greatly, which pastor who helped me greatly, others who have helped me greatly. But these things need to be figured out. And dig deep, really dig deep. The things that scare you the most, or the things you don't want to talk about the most, are probably the things you need to be talking about. That's painful, isn't it? Just to think about that. That's really painful. So be aware of that. Deal with yourself, deal with your issues, and the chances of the relationship getting better gets much higher. But what if you're doing everything you can? Maybe you're going to church, maybe you're doing all that you can, but your spouse isn't. And let's make this even more challenging. Let's say your spouse is abusive. Abusive, we're going to say physical and or emotional, which usually goes hand in hand. Or let's say they have addiction issues. It's very possible. What do? Do I stay committed and sacrifice for them? Well, no, let's define a little bit better what love is here. When we love God, being committed to God, we're 100% committed. We do not quit on that. Versus being committed to somebody else. We cannot be as committed to people as we are to God. Let me explain this. God's perfect, obviously. God's perfect. So there's no reason for you not to commit to him. 100%. God can literally do no wrong. And even if it looks like he did something wrong, you missed the point. You are not seeing the entire picture. So God is not the issue. You be committed as you can be to God. When it comes to people, a spouse, a loved one who's being abusive, my rule, let's go with physical abuse. My rule is at minimum, you separate yourself. At minimum. I hate to even talk about this, but because it's a reality of life, we need to talk about it. But if there's physical abuse, you leave. No questions asked, you leave. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. You don't want to do it maybe, but you have to go. You don't want to be that person who doesn't leave, that codependent person who will not leave. Do not do that to yourself. At minimum, you must leave that place. Later, if you can talk to your spouse, good. But if that person is unwilling to listen and or turn, in fact, that's the only situation I can see in counseling sessions that cannot be figured out. When one of them is stuck on what they believe, your own will. That's the only thing that I cannot give you an answer for. Your will, and this is I lay down ground rules usually. The ground rule is this: the only way it won't work is if you're not willing. If you've got the will, if you can bring the will, I'll give you all the techniques. I'll give you all of that. I'll give you all the Bible verses. I can do that. But you have to bring your A game. You have to want change, and not just change for the other person, but change for yourself. And there are cases where one party is not willing to change. They're not willing to see it any differently. They're not willing to change their mind. Everyone else is wrong. They're always right. Guess what, buddy? I can't help you. I will dismiss that person, and when they're ready to deal with it, then they can come back and we can deal with it. That said, you now have to realize what you have to do. If this person is physically abusive, and usually that comes with drinking and drugs or something of that sort, not always, but many times, you will have to lay down your own healthy ground rules. This is what they call boundaries. You'll have to lay down some healthy boundaries. This is still love. This is all within the realms of healthy love. Being committed goes both ways. If the commitment is not being done both ways, then it cannot be true love in the relationship. That doesn't mean that the other party doesn't love you. More than likely, they're just going through their own traumatic issues and they don't know how to deal with it. That's the case most of the time. And that is usually the case for failed relationships, is either immaturity and or trauma. That's what it comes down to. And the immaturity, is also education. They may not know how to deal with relationships, whether it was because they're too young or whether they didn't have a good model at home. And that happens. But you'll have to lay down healthy boundaries. If this person is being physically abusive, we'll even throw in emotionally abusive. That's a little bit more technical because it depends. Every case is different. How much, how often, all the time, some of the time, all of these will depend on how you deal with the emotional abuse. But even with emotional abuse, the rule still applies. You at least, at minimum, separate yourself. But there has to be a time when you guys can both sit down and talk about these things and say, look, this stuff is hurting me. Can we work through this? Whether it's together, whether it's you doing it, whether it's me doing it, whether it's us doing it. We've got to figure this out. And in some cases, it takes a long time. Drug abuse sometimes is not easy to get over overnight. Past trauma, molestation, if I may throw in there, is not easy to get over. You can't just go once or twice to a counseling session and expect it just to all disappear. It's a process. It's that whole Shrek thing, the onion. There's layers, right? It is. It's actually true. It's very, very true. There's layers. There's layers to you. There's layers to us in life. There's layers to us. Now, someone might be asking, well, how can that be love? How can that be showing commitment if I'm leaving? Remember, commitment works both ways. You being constantly abused and you staying doesn't mean you're showing them love. It isn't. What true love is willing to say, I love you so much, I'll leave you. Because not only are you hurting me, you're hurting yourself. So consider these things. This is, again, I know it's easier for me to say this than to do this. It's easier said than done. I know that. But what's right is right. I'm not a fan of divorce. I don't like divorce. I hate divorce. But it's a reality of life. It is. And many people don't know this. Did you guys know that Moses actually had a divorce? He says he saddles her on the donkey and off he sends his wife. So Moses got a divorce. God himself says, I'm divorcing Israel in the Old Testament. He says that. He says, I'm giving you the decree of divorce. God is a divorcee. How about that? But why does he do that? Because he's done with them not listening to him. He's done. That ends up being a type of emotional abuse. Who'd have thunk? God's a divorcee. So if you're divorced, hey, you're not alone. God himself is a divorcee. Now, in God's case, he wants his wife back, Israel. And that's where you read Revelation. That's where he gets his wife back. So in God's case, he's able to cure the issue. He is God. Unfortunately for us, it's not always like that. But as for divorce, I don't like it. I hate it. I tell people, do everything you can humanly do to try to help not having a divorce. But there does come a time where you say, okay, enough is enough, and I can't do it anymore. So before you jump into divorce, by all means, seek help, talk to your pastor, get counseling, and do it a couple times. Do it a few times. Take some time with it. And in those cases where the spouse just isn't willing to do any of it, let's go to an extreme. Let's just say that they're verbally, physically abusive, or they're abusing drugs. It's all abuse. And you're willing to go get counseling, and they're not willing to get counsel. You're willing to go to your pastor. They're not willing to go to their pastor. You're willing to do anything that they're willing to do, and they don't act on anything. So it just sounds like everything that you're trying is it's almost like a dead end. Or if you can think of anything else, because here's what I tell people when they're talking divorce in counseling sessions. I tell them, look, pretend like you're divorced right now. Let's just say right now you have the papers in your hand that says you're officially divorced. What would you regret? Usually that's the issue. They regret that, oh, well, if I would have done this, then maybe that would have saved the marriage. So picture yourself divorced. What would that thought be? I wish I would have gotten counseling. Then go and get counseling by all means. I wish I gave him one more chance. Okay, fine, give him one more chance if that's what's necessary here. Whatever it is, whatever you feel like that regret would be, do it. Do as much of it as you can, because sometimes whatever you thought of might have done it. Great. Because here's the thing, if you're going to go down that road, it's an ugly road. It's a very ugly road. It might even get uglier on that side. We sometimes think the grass is greener, but it really isn't. So do everything humanly possible so that you have very little to no regret before you were to divorce. Again, I hate divorce, but unfortunately it's a reality of life. If someone asked me and said, hey, should I get divorced? I would say, did you try everything humanly possible? Well, number one, are you being abused? If the answer is yes, I would say at least separate. And number two, you do your best to try to salvage that marriage. Again, that is what commitment is. That's what sacrifice is. It hurts me, but I want to fix this. If you've done everything humanly possible, you've gotten counsel from pastor, from your counselor, from whoever else, books, read all the books, okay? If you still can't get the answer, if it still doesn't work, if they still don't change, well, then that's probably when we start to consider the D word. Again, I don't like it. I'm not for it. I'm not saying I like it, but it is a reality of life. Me as a Christian, I despise divorce, but it's in the Bible. It's there. I'm not saying it's good, but that's what happens. Being an imperfect human being, living in an imperfect world, imperfect things happen. But we're defining love as being 100% committed and willing to sacrifice of yourself. Will you do it? Can you do it? Well, I hope this show was helpful. I hope you got something out of it. It was some sort of blessing for you. And if it was, please let me know. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear what you're thinking. Go to finallyaliveradio.com and let me know what you're thinking. You contact me there, email me. And I want to know your thoughts. I want to know more, even questions. If you have questions, I'll answer it. Come join me on finallyaliveradio.com. I'll see you there. God bless you.
Thank you again for joining us on this week's program with Pastor and Counselor Gary Harris of Finally Alive Ministries. We pray that if God has touched your heart with any part of today's teaching, you would respond and move into the healing that God has for you. Visit us at finallyalive.com. There, you can download this episode for free, email your concerns, questions, or share a story of how God is using this teaching to help you grow in Christ and His freedom. If you'd like to call our prayer line, you may do so at 657-246-2464. That's 657-246-2464. Or email at prayer@finallyalive.com. We will meet you again next week at this same time when we look at God's Word with pastor and counselor Gary Harris and learn how to finally be alive in Christ.